quite often we default into the good girl, but where that juice and thrill and electricity lives is in the unknown, in the places where we're not supposed to go, the things we aren't supposed to do. So the taboo is actually this beautiful well of life force energy. And it's something that, you know, we actually crave and we actually long for, but we feel so ashamed and disconnected from it, we don't know how to access it. I'm Kimi Inch, and I am most passionate in my whole life about introducing people into what's possible in their lives, especially their erotic lives, in and out of the bedroom.
Hey, I'm Taylor Davis. Welcome to Wildly Satisfied. I hope you enjoy the show. We are so excited today. I am so pumped for this conversation because I have a very special guest who is an amazing human being. Like, I am so glad that I got to know this person. I got to just honestly fall in love with you and your business and what you bring to the world. And this has been a long time coming where I'm like, oh, I can't wait to have conversations about eroticism and about dark femme and just so many amazing, beautiful things that you bring to the world. So without further ado, this is Kimi Inch. And I know her because she is my client. And I got to beautifully come to some of your events, like Something More, see the entire back end of how your angels and how you operate in this erotic space, which is so unlike anywhere else in the world, which is, I'm not just saying that because I love you. I've heard it from people who have been in this space for 20 or 30 years. And to see how you bring such grounded, beautiful, I don't want to say like tantra, but heart-centered, right? Heart-centered version of exploring your eroticism and what that looks like. And I just can't wait to have this conversation, this whole series. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that so much.
And I know this goddess here because she's my personal dom. She tells me what to do. She keeps it real. And she's also the mastermind behind the And More brand, who is an incredible strategist and also just an uplifting essence in my life that is always there to sort of support me and guide me through this journey of being a boss ass bitch. And it's not easy, but you make it so much more fun and so much more softer and gentler than I thought it needed to be. Like, you really tapped me into how I can create success and navigate my business from a feminine lens, where it's all about being in receptivity and to call it in and to manifest. And that was so much better than the blood, sweat, and tears routine I had been doing before I met you. So thank God. Thank God.
Thank you.
Because now I have more time to enjoy life because of it, and more success than ever because of you. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to start crying.
Yeah,
I just did my makeup. I can't do that. No crying.
No tears.
No tears. No blood, sweat, and tears here. No. I love this. I want to also say that before I was in the sensuality world, right? I had sensual clients. I was in different sensual experiences, very heart-centered, beautiful ones. But I got to experience an entirely new level of what that looked like, where I thought I knew what heart-centered was until I met you. And the programs and the way that you hold space and the way that I've been able to normalize eroticism and what that looks like in so many varying degrees, because everybody is different. And I attribute that so much to you.
Thank you.
I just love it so much. So we're so excited. We're going to be talking about so much in this series. So dark feminine energy, eroticism, how superficial sexiness is so last decade.
Totally. It is.
It is. And so many other things. So let's dive right in.
Please.
Sounds good. Okay. So let's start with the parts of you that are exiled and how you can use them to become erotically activated. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because people talk a lot about shadow work.
Yes.
They talk a lot about shame and the parts that we don't want to look at. And even in the taboo space, these parts of you are taboo.
Yes.
And you always have this beautiful perspective on it. And I would love for you to just dive into shadows and using that to be able to be erotically activated.
Thank you. You know, it's so interesting because when we talk about things like taboo, the things we shouldn't be doing, the things that aren't considered acceptable in polite society, and also really goes against our ego's idea of what our image should look like. Most often, these things are created from us growing up in our households and the messaging we would get from our caregivers. Not enough is usually one, and the other is too much. So because we receive these messages so young, we actually contract our energetic bodies and don't allow for the fullness of who we are to really shine through. So the work that we're doing with men and women is actually getting them tapped into a more expanded version of themselves. Most often people are defaulting to this sort of like good girl character, like this archetype of the good girl. And listen, I love with the right person. I love being called good girl in the bedroom, but the problem with this good girl image is that it actually is this small version of ourselves, usually like really people pleasing and really, behaved and not actually tapped into our truth and our wildness and, all of these other things that help us to feel alive. We actually like shut down this aliveness. And the idea of playing with shadow work is like what happens when we sort of travel into the underworld and visit these parts and pieces of ourselves that aren't always so good, always so proper, and those parts of ourselves can be our killer. Those parts can be our dom. Those parts could be our seductress or our dirty little sluts. And like all of these parts that hold a lot of juice and a lot of thrill. And quite often we default into the good girl, but where that juice and thrill and electricity lives is in the unknown, in the places where we're not supposed to go, the things we aren't supposed to do. So the taboo is actually this beautiful well of life spring, this is life spring of life force energy. And it's something that, we actually crave and we actually long for, but we feel so ashamed and disconnected from it, we don't know how to access it. So creating a safe space for people to expand outside of the daily hours types of personalities they hold, and giving them a space to be messy, be sexy, be wild, be dark, and give them that opportunity to get off on being in the taboo instead of shaming themselves over it is such a liberating and empowering place to be.
I love that. I feel like there's a part there where it's like your greatest shadow is actually your greatest freedom. There's such room in there to play.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be dark and heavy and all these things. Because I know that sometimes it is, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I know that we've both existed in the spiritual world. Obviously, we're in that a lot. And there's a lot of like deep, rip me open shadow work, and it cannot feel the best, and people can kind of pull away from it.
Totally.
And so I think for yours, what I've seen is when people lean into it, it's a lot more juicy and squishy and like you get to like, you're like, oh, okay, wait, there's this part of me that I don't have to hide and it can be celebrated for it. And you're like, oh, and then you realize that like your shadow is your superpower.
Right.
It's where you get to play.
Right.
I would love to hear more about what that's looked like for people.
Well, it's interesting because when we are working with sexuality and kink and tantra and things of these natures, a lot of people have a lot of desires that, they keep under wraps because, again, we get concerned about how the world is going to view us, and we get sort of trapped in these boxes. But when you're actually able to give yourself permission and say, listen, I know my shame about my desires might come from my religion or my cultural background, or, it might come from a place, but it can actually enliven me to actually embrace these naughtier parts of myself. And not only does it feel so good for you, but it actually feels really good for your partners too. It feels good for your lovers when you are able to tap into your full expression, when you're able to tap into the parts of you that are exiled and these naughtier parts of you, and you get to play with them. And when I work with people, it's like, let's go big with these things. Like, let's see how big your priestess, your seductress, your slut can be. Maybe you wouldn't bring that version of you to the office, and I understand why. But once you really go big with that energy and you feel it viscerally in your own body and you get to play with it and other people get to witness it, you figure out a way of how to bring it into more subtleties. So you can actually like bring this like big, like, oh, I am so juicy and I'm so hot and like, I can bring all of that and I can start to condense it down and start to really feel it in my body. So it's no longer that, it's like a, and that's just how I'm going to be on my date with this gentleman. I'm just going to have that little bit of essence within me, that seductress within me that he can feel, even if it's subconsciously, he might be able to feel it, but it's actually giving you life. It's giving you energy and you're not cutting off from it anymore. You're actually embracing it.
I love that. It reminds me of, to take it out of like an erotic context.
Why? I love that.
Well, it's like a sexy superhero power. Because like when superheroes are activated, it's like they get their powers. And then everything, it like blows up. The energy is just so big and they don't know what to do with it. And they, you know, it expands so big. And then they learn how to hone it and they learn how to use that power in the moment to show up differently. And then it's like, oh, you stepped into like full superhero status.
Totally. That's mastery.
Yeah.
Like that is mastery. It's like not only learning how to have access to it and how to cultivate it within yourself, but also how to channel it, how to hone it, how to let it be in service to you in your careers, in your relationships, in your life, so that you're getting the most out of what you want on a daily basis. And when you're able to really go into the dark, you're able to hold more complexity and more extremes as well, because you're basically widening the container that you're holding already.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So the more that you sort of travel into the underworld and in these dark, shadowy places, you're actually giving yourself a sense of more resiliency in your nervous system. And ultimately, your nervous system is what dictates everything in your life. It truly, truly does. So if there's a sense of your nervous system that gets into overwhelm very easily. I know that's something that happens to me all the time, or gets into states of anxiety or fear. When you start playing with that in a safe environment with people who want to support you in that exploration, you can start widening that container and you will realize like, oh, I can actually deal with a lot more. I can actually hold a lot more because I have work that muscle. I've done my reps, you know, like I've worked that muscle and now I have built inner strength, not just outer strength, but the inner strength within me to be able to navigate life with more ease, grace, and elegance.
I think too on that, I feel like for me, when it goes into other parts of your life where when I normalize in my nervous system being around safe masculine energy, being in erotic spaces and things like that, I was like, oh, this is just for this side of my life, like dating and love and everything. But then I realized once I did it there and I was able to really work with my nervous system in that context, it actually went to other parts of my life that I didn't realize. And so I was able to, I was able to use that to be able to fuel pieces. And even everybody I know, they're like, yeah, your energy is different. It's kind of like when you dive into the underworld, you unlock all these different aspects of you that start to come to light, and it actually brings you back into like a level of wholeness.
Yes.
Which is beautiful.
It is. It's exciting because, you know, people get nervous about these erotic practices because they think it has to look a certain way, but it's really more about how do I tap into this in an energetic sense? Don't have to break out the whips and chains. You don't have to hang your partner upside down. Like it's so easy, or it's so much more simple to just feel like, oh, what would it mean if I were to really just feel into the parts of me that do want to, you know, ensnare and like, you know, invite in with pleasure. And like, how does that change the way I feel, the way I look, the way I talk, and what does that evoke in the environment around me? Because quite often we're inspiring everything around us all the time, but who do you need to be to show up in order to inspire the things outside of you that you actually want to inspire, that you actually want coming towards you?
Yeah, and it's amazing to see how that energy influences and impacts people around you. Oh, yeah. I talk a lot about standards with people. I've talked about it with you, and standards and systems and what that looks like in your business and even in your life. And when you have that energy and you tap in, you realize like where you have not been tapping in because there's a shadow to it that you haven't like fully brought back into yourself. It's pieces of the puzzle that have been scattered everywhere. And then you bring that into yourself and you're like, oh, this clicks into place. I have different standards now to allow for this. And then it becomes a whole different level of wholeness and an identity that you're like, this is the person that has been leading me my whole life. At least that's what I feel like for me. Does it feel like the same for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I just think about my humanness. Like, you know, I might see a woman who's on Instagram and she's an influencer and she's super beautiful and successful. And I will, for a moment, hear the voice in me that's like, that bitch. what's wrong with me? Like, why don't I have that? And, you know, like, and I would like, those little voices will pop up, and quite often, you know, they pop up and we're like, no, I shouldn't feel that way. I shouldn't even think things like that. Like, bad girl, you know? But what if we were actually like able to take a moment and say like, some voice is showing up right now. Like, what would it feel like to actually be able to bring some breath, movement, and sound to it? So what if instead of me being like, oh, I should never say something like that about a fellow woman. Like, what if about instead I was like, let myself have it, and let myself maybe have a little bit of a tantrum. Like, I want to be the queen. I want to be special. Me. And maybe brought some movement, breath, and sound so that it can actually have some life in my body and move through it so I can release it into the world. Because quite often we get stuck in these like mental loops. And I think we do that because we don't actually allow ourselves to feel the feelings behind the mental thoughts that we're having, where we're just constantly like mulling them over again and again and again, unless we actually just allow ourselves to feel it, let it go, and then go back to our lives again.
It's like you get a container to be able to, you give it its time. If you don't give it its time, it's going to take over everything. It's going to run in the back.
Everything. Yeah. So right. And it comes out sideways, and it comes out in this passive aggressiveness, and it comes out in these little like mumbly comments, and it like it taints the energy field of whatever you're doing and whatever you're practicing in, because there's a way that you're not fully embodying who you are. And if you were just to say, like, create the container for myself to have an experience where I fully express this moment that is coming through to me, then maybe on the other side of it, it would just be a lot more relaxed and just like, oh, well, that was entertaining. I'm going to go back to my life now, you know, and feel completely free of it.
Yeah.
So
it's like
liberated.
It's very liberated. It's like a kid giving it time for it to have its tantrum, and then be like, okay, do you feel better now? And they're like, yes. Okay, I'll go sit back down. Like, okay, cool. Like, that's what has to happen. So
Totally.
I just love that. Okay. This is amazing. I feel like bringing parts of yourself to be from Exile and to really does allow you to be erotically activated. Like, this is fantastic.
Well, that's the part. The erotic energy is that life force energy. So you can either be in your ego and maintain this image of what you want to portray to the world, or you can be in Eros, which I'm telling you, everyone, is so much more juicy and fun and enlivening. And you're going to attract more that you want in life when you're in Eros as opposed to ego.
Thank you so much for listening to this Wildly Satisfied production. I hope you enjoyed the show, and we would love it if you would share it with someone that you love, leave a review, or come tag us on social media at Wildly Satisfied.